It was early autumn, and it was raining heavily. The dark sky looked like it was about to collapse. Because of the weather, it was only 5 o'clock in the afternoon, but the sky was already dark. Zhu King stepped on the rainwater and ran wildly on the street. His trousers were rolled up high, and the water splashed a few meters away. "Little Zhu, you didn't bring an umbrella." The old man in the security booth saw him running like a wild dog from afar. He wiped the rainwater off his face and said, "Anyway, it's all wet. Don't bother." As soon as he finished speaking, he straightened his slightly loose trousers and continued to run towards the neighborhood with his pattering footsteps. There were few residents in the old community, and there were not many people in this kind of weather. Zhu King ran all the way to the entrance of the corridor. He stomped his feet twice, lowered his head and pinched the corner of his dripping clothes. He took out the key from his trouser pocket and walked into the building. Zhu King was stunned when he saw a figure at the side of the door. It was a girl leaning against the wall. She looked up at the light warily, and then looked at him coldly with a vigilant face. A few strands of hair stuck to her face, and the ends of her hair were dripping with water. It seemed that she had also walked in the rain. What stunned him was not the girl herself, but the dress of the girl. She was cosplaying as an ancient swordsman. She was dressed in a vintage linen robe. Her left hand was holding the sword in front of her, and her right hand was holding the hilt. She was wearing straw sandals. The sandals were tattered and her toes were showing. Dedicated, really dedicated. Seeing the tattered straw sandals, Zhu King could not help but praise her. He glanced at it casually and continued to take out the key to open the door. The girl saw his action and suddenly tensed up. She was even more vigilant, and her back was slightly arched. She said with a strange accent, "Stop." Zhu King shook the key in his hand and pointed to the door. "This is my house." After a pause, he could not help but feel somewhat helpless. "Do I look like a bad guy?" He was able to scare the girl to this extent from a few meters away. Looking at the girl slowly backing away, Zhu King felt even more offended, as if he had been FC-ked. Zhu King locked the strange girl outside the door and locked the door. She stripped off her wet clothes and ran to the bathroom to take a shower. The water flowed down, making him feel refreshed. After getting drenched in the rain, he took a hot shower. Then, he put on his pajamas and went to the fridge to get a bottle of Coca-Cola. He unscrewed the cap and he was delighted. "White gourd, come here." He did not stay idle while drinking Coke. He used the remote control to turn on the TV, then went to the corner of the room to take out cat food from the cabinet and poured it into White Gourd's rice bowl to feed it. White Gourd was originally a stray cat. 2 years ago, it was skinny and lying on the wall of the neighborhood. This guy stared at it for a few days, and then he picked an auspicious day to hook it up with a ham sausage and took it home to feed it. A good little wild cat had been fed into a useless fat otaku, and now it came to eat his cat food. There was wind and rain outside, Coke and a cat in the house. Zhu King stretched and looked out the window. He picked up his phone and ordered a 3-piece set of hamburgers, chicken rolls, and Coke. 2 bolts of lightning flashed in the sky. The dull rumbling of thunder was getting closer and closer. The rain was getting heavier. He glanced at the time, then looked at the door. After thinking for a moment, he found an umbrella in the room and looked out through the peephole. He did not see the hedgehog-like girl. Squeak. He opened the door and looked out. Zhu King was looking at the cold eyes a few steps away, as well as her defensive posture. He felt a little awkward. This was the first time someone was guarding against him like he was a wolf. It's getting dark, and the rain doesn't look like it will stop anytime soon. If your house is not far. Zhu King showed a smile that he thought was kind and raised the umbrella in his hand. Seeing that the girl did not move, he tilted his head and continued, "If it is far, you can call your family to pick you up." Although the girl was wet, she still looked a little valiant. There was a heroic spirit in her eyes. She was probably not from around here, or else he would definitely have an impression of her. "Where is this?" The girl finally spoke. She still had that weird accent, and her right hand was holding the hilt of her broken sword. Zhu King leaned against the door with the umbrella. Looking at her, he had some guesses. "This is Jaya neighborhood, Beiweng Road." The two of them looked at each other. The girl frowned slightly and asked after a moment of silence, "Who are you?" Zhu King did not know how to respond. "A kind-hearted neighbor. She must be crazy. Just call me handsome." He looked up. "Do you want the umbrella? If not, I'll take it back." "Salt gang." The girl's expression was uncertain. Looking at the black umbrella in his hand, she finally let down some of her guard. Her expression softened a little. She let go of the sword hilt and said, "I am a disciple of the Salt gang. I don't know why I am here." Zhu King blinked. She really was crazy. "Forget it. I'll call the security and see what happens." Handing over the umbrella was a simple matter, but he did not expect it to be a girl who could not extricate herself from cosplay. He glanced at the girl in the corridor again. She was dressed in coarse hemp clothes, her hair tied up with a rope behind her head. She was looking at him with a sword in her hand, looking like a martial arts hero. He shrugged helplessly and returned to the room to look for his phone. If she stayed out in the rain for a night, or ran around in the rain when it got dark, she might see it on the news tomorrow. Zhu King picked up the phone from the sofa and dialed the security uncle's number. Seeing the girl outside the door looking into the room, he waved his hand to indicate that she could come in. Hello, Jiao Shu, can you hear me? After 2 beeps, the phone was connected. The girl stood at the door and did not come in again. She looked at him with curiosity and vigilance. Hello, Jiao Shu, The TV suddenly switched to an advertisement. The loud volume shocked Zhu King. The girl at the door was also shocked, and then, bang, smoke rose from the TV on the wall. A diamond-shaped dart was nailed in the middle. Hello, Xiao Zhu, what's wrong? The security uncle's voice came from the phone. Clang, the long sword in the girl's hand was unsheathed, and a cold light flashed. Zhu King looked at the TV, and then at the girl who was staring at him with the sword in her hand. He stood rooted to the ground. Putting down his phone, Zhu King felt a chill run down his spine. Where did you say you were from? He looked at the dart embedded in the TV, feeling that this was not a simple matter. From the Wuqiao acrobatic troupe, the girl was like a startled rabbit. Everything in front of her was beyond her understanding. And who are you talking to? Zhu King looked at the girl outside the door, dressed in coarse linen clothes and straw sandals. Put your sword away first. I'm a good person, I even gave you an umbrella. He kicked the umbrella beside him, trying to appease the strange girl. The girl looked at the umbrella, then at him, then at the ruined TV on the wall. After some thought, she slowly sheathed her sword. What's your name? Where are you from? Zhang He, disciple of the Salt Gang. Aha, Zhang He. That's a good name. Zhu King laughed and changed the topic. Is your Salt Gang big? Where is it? Zhu King heard her mention the Salt Gang a few times and inwardly guessed that it must be quite a big gang. Gusu Salt Gang, you don't know. Jiang He frowned and looked at the layout of the room again and could not help but bite his lip. Oh no, even if he did not ask around, this place must be very far from home. Never heard of it. Do you want to? Zhu King was conflicted. This girl had a weapon in her hand. Should he let her in? Or trick her out and call the police? He was still in a daze, drinking cola and stroking the cat. This was a comfortable life, and suddenly someone destroyed the TV, and the culprit was standing at the door with a sword. Good deeds are hard to do, and good people are hard to be. The two of them stared at each other in silence for a moment. Zhu King took another look at her exposed toes outside her straw sandals, her soaked clothes, and her hair that was stuck together by the rain. He gritted his teeth and took 2 steps back. Why don't you come in first? If someone sees you standing there with a weapon in your hand. The police station is just across the street. He gestured, not knowing if the girl could understand him. Anyway, he didn't look like a psychopath. You'd better close the door. Yes, I'm a good person. I can help you. If you have any questions, you can tell me. I want to go home. Where is your house? Salt Gang. Zhu King was having a headache. This is Jaya District, Beiweng Road, Yongkang New District, Zhongcheng City. Seeing the confusion on the girl's face, he probed, do you know about Zhongcheng City? Jiang He shook his head. You can't be an ancient person, right? Are you kidding me? Who's the emperor? Your Majesty, she reacted, pursing her lips as she looked at Zhu King. Zhu King was shocked. Who's your Majesty? Your Majesty is your Majesty. He scratched his head. What year is it now? Jiang He looked at him strangely, as if he didn't understand what he meant. He paused for a moment, then said in that strange accent, Kaiyuan, you're 16. Zhu King had goosebumps. He was sure that this girl, this little heroine wasn't joking. He picked up his phone with trembling hands and searched. Kaiyuan, you're 16. His eyes widened as he tried to suppress his heartbeat. He took a deep breath and said, Tang Xuanzong. Huh? Jiang He was stunned. Oh, right, this is only available after death. What is this? Take out. Jiang He turned around abruptly and pointed at the door with his sword. Well, you step back first. Someone is delivering food to me. He's not a bad guy. Zhu King scratched his head. Yes, go over there. Don't let anyone see you. Servant? No, he's just delivering some food. Hearing this, Jiang He retreated to the back of the door doubtfully. Everything was strange, so she had to be careful. Don't worry, I'm a good person. Zhu King tried his best to calm himself down and walked over. He comforted her in a low voice and opened the door a crack. After taking the hamburger combo, he immediately closed the door and lifted the takeout bag up, gesturing to Jiang He. Food. After a pause, he continued to ask, are you hungry? Do you want to eat together? Zhu King chewed on the hamburger and sorted out his thoughts. He picked up the chicken roll and gestured to her. Have some. I'm sure you haven't eaten it before. It's fine. Jiang he swallowed and shook his head. Then have some water. I already have water. This cup is for you. He swirled the cola that he opened earlier and pushed the cup that came with the hamburger combo away. It's sweet. I guess you haven't had it before. Are you looking down on me? No. Jiang he frowned, feeling that something was amiss. What are you eating? Didn't you say it's food? Yes, food is what can fill one's stomach. Zhu King took the hamburger and explained to her. This is called hamburger. Hey, bang. The cola on the table was knocked over by his elbow and fell to the floor. The brown liquid sizzled and bubbled on the floor. Both of them looked at it and the room fell into a strange silence. Playing FCK, it's a misunderstanding. In a civilized society, people would draw their swords and kill at the slightest provocation. It shouldn't be. Zhu King had a hard time explaining that it was not poison. A drop of sweat rolled down his forehead. The cola was knocked down on purpose. He didn't expect it to almost cause a murder. Judging from her reaction, she didn't seem to be joking. He was skeptical at first, but now he was 70% convinced. Can you not draw your sword at the slightest provocation? Zhu King stared at the sword in Jiang He's hand and said, I am a good person. Otherwise, who would care if you lived or died if I locked you outside the door, right? You scared white gourd. The fat cat curled up in the corner, licking its fur and squinting at the two stupid humans. Leaning against the back of the sofa, Zhu King rubbed his forehead and thought about what to do and how to deal with it. Facing this irascible little girl, there were only 3 choices. One was to trick her out and close the door. Whether she starved to death, froze to death, or killed indiscriminately, it was none of his business. He estimated that in 3 days at most, he would see news of her being arrested or shot to death on the news. 2 was to directly call the police and let the police deal with this matter. 3. Stay and watch. Zhu King looked up and glanced at her. His mind was racing. An ancient heroine was in front of him, in his own home, holding a sword in front of him. Could he let her go? The scene from a sci-fi novel was right in front of him. How could he let it go? In just a short moment, he had already analyzed everything clearly. Goo-goo. Zhu King tilted his head. This was the sound coming from the little heroine's stomach. Have some. He picked up the untouched chicken roll and handed it to her. Since she had decided to stay, he had to find a way to pacify her. What's this? Jiang he hesitated. He took another look at the black umbrella beside the sofa and started to believe that the man was a good person. Zhu King tore open a corner of the chicken roll. Should I take a bite first to prove it's not poisonous? Sure. Forget it. I guess you can't get used to it. I'll order some rice with meat and vegetables for you later. Zhu King took a bite and chewed while thinking about what to do next. Since she had decided to stay, she had to cover up her identity. Do you know where this is? He asked. Then he patted the sofa and made way for her. Sit and talk. I'm scared if you stand there with a sword. Jiang he came over and reached out to press the sofa twice. She slowly sat down. She still looked at him with vigilance, but she was much more relaxed than before. She hadn't been idle. From the beginning until now, she had been analyzing and judging her situation. Although she was unfamiliar with everything, she knew the umbrella. The man in front of her did want to give her an umbrella at the beginning. It was just that this room was a little strange, and the food he ate. Jiang he guessed that the man in front of her might have some weird habits. She had to be careful. Where is this? Zhongcheng City. Zhu King rubbed his nose, looked up and thought for a moment, and said, I don't know how to explain it. Do you know Lai Bai? You know where he is? Well, don't be afraid of what I'm going to say next. Jiang he looked at him without blinking. Go ahead. Put the sword aside first. I'm afraid you'll get excited. Okay. She looked sideways, put the sword on the table, and slowly let go of her hand. She said in a strange accent, it doesn't matter where this is. I want to go home. You may not be able to go back. Why? Because this place is very far from your home. Hearing this, Jiang He's eyelids trembled slightly. She looked up at Zhu King and asked, how far is it? Well, it's more than 1,200 years away. Jiang He frowned and asked in confusion, what do you mean? She couldn't understand what years had to do with distance. Did she need to walk for 1,000 years to go home? Here, Zhu King pointed at his feet and observed her expression. He slowly said, it's 1,200 years after your time. Lai Longji, Lai Bai, Yang Yuhuan, and Lushan. Whether you know them or not, your emperor, your friends, and those people you know are all people from more than 1,000 years ago. They died more than 1,000 years ago. A bunch of nonsense. Jiang He suddenly stood up and looked around. She couldn't believe what he was saying. Whether it's nonsense or not, you can slowly investigate it. Anyway, you've seen it now. There's nothing you're familiar with. Seeing that she didn't pick up the sword, Zhu King was slightly relieved. Seeing that Jiang He was standing there with an uncertain expression. You're lying to me. Jiang He frowned and looked at him. You're a smart person. I think you should have your own judgment. Zhu King pointed at his head and pointed outside. Haven't you seen the outside world? This world is completely different from the world you're familiar with. Those people you're familiar with, they've all become history. Looking at Jiang He's appearance, he suddenly felt a little sad. If you were to be thrown into the future more than 1,000 years later, he probably wouldn't be much stronger than her, right? Nonsense. Jiang He gritted his teeth and picked up the sword from the table. I don't believe it. With that, she turned around and wanted to go out. Wait. Clang. The long sword was half unsheathed and pointed at Zhu King. I've just said, this world has its own set of laws. You have to understand it first to be safe. Zhu King stood still and watched her draw the sword for the third time. He didn't move forward, but he wasn't angry or impatient. Why did you help me? When White Gourd was outside, I also picked him up. White Gourd. There, that fat cat. Jiang He followed his line of sight. The fat cat was lying on the cabinet and yawning lazily. Are you looking down on me? No. Jiang He leaned against the door. Her hair was messy and stuck to the side of her face. She held the sword in her left hand and held the door with her right hand. She looked at Zhu King and fell into silence. She was not stupid. She just lacked knowledge. Although she did not know if Zhu King was telling the truth or if there were any lies in his words, she could tell from the first glance that this person did not mean any harm. He just came home normally and met her. When he saw that it was getting dark outside, he lent her an umbrella and let her go. Why did you help me? She asked for the second time. Zhu King scratched his head. This heroine was not easy to fool. To be honest, it's a little novel. After all, this kind of thing is too magical. Zhu King gestured with his hand. You should be able to understand, right? Let's say, if I go to your era and meet you, and you see a man from more than 1,000 years in the future, do you also feel magical? Times are different. We can't kill people casually here. Everyone loves peace. Zhu King felt a chill on his back. Once again, he was conflicted about whether to let her stay or not. If he stayed, it was too dangerous. If he didn't, it would be a pity. This was a living ancient person. He continued to be silent for a while. I don't know how you came here. If you can find out the reason, you might be able to go back. But before that, you have to learn how to live in this world. The first rule is that you can't hurt people casually. Zhu King turned to look at the broken television on the wall and added, and you can't destroy things casually. After a pause, he reached out to the door and gestured for her to leave. If I can do it, I want to help you. Or you can leave now. By the way, it's better not to hurt people outside. There are government officials everywhere now, and they are very powerful. It was already dark outside. The rain was getting lighter. The pitter-patter of rain could be heard from outside the window. Jiang He looked up at the light bulb on the roof and pursed her lips. She knew nothing about this place. Her clothes were also different from everyone else. She might not even be able to leave the city. If she left, she really didn't know where to go. Growl. His stomach growled again. Zhu King looked at her for a moment, then turned back to the sofa and picked up his phone. If you agree, put down the sword, and I'll order a meal for you. That is, I'll get someone to send food over. To be honest, I'm taking a risk by taking you in, and it's a two-sided risk. Not only do I have to prevent you from being discovered by others, but I also have to worry that you might kill me if there's a misunderstanding. So, do you understand? Jiang He thought for a moment and nodded slowly. He glanced at the sword in his hand, paused for a moment, and then threw it aside. Clang! The solid iron sword fell to the ground with a loud thud. Zhu King's lips curled up slightly. He turned around with his phone in his hand and said, "What do you usually eat? You might not like the food here. Let me see if there's anything you're familiar with." He thought for a moment, then shook his head and said, "Forget it. I'll order some porridge and buns for you. You're all wet. You can take a bath first. You can eat it when you come out." He brought her to the bathroom and turned on the light. He said, "There are many magical things in this world. Don't make a fuss. I always feel that someone is trying to harm you. At least I won't harm you. Don't worry. Look at this." He turned the switch of the shower, and water gushed out from the shower head. Jiang He was just stunned as she watched him operate. To the left is hot water, to the right is cold water. Press it down and it will stop. Pull it up and water will come out. Here, try it. Zhu King taught her briefly and let her operate it herself. Fortunately, this ancient person just hadn't seen it before. She was not stupid. She learned how to operate it after watching him demonstrate it once. She couldn't hide the curiosity on her face. "This is for shampoo. Press it here and it will come out. If you apply it on your hair, there will be bubbles. It's normal. Just rinse the bubbles away. Then, you can use this to wash your body. Just apply it on your hair." Zhu King taught his friend from ancient times how to use the bathroom and casually explained how to use the toilet bowl. When he saw her nod, he consciously retreated. He scratched his head and sat on the sofa. He looked back. The light was on, but there was no sound of the shower. He thought for a moment and went back to the bedroom. He took out his clothes from the closet and carried them over. He was still standing there with his clothes on, looking at Zhu King, who suddenly came in. There was a trace of vigilance in his eyes. There are no women's clothes at home. Just make do with it. I will go out and buy 2 clothes for you tomorrow. Zhu King's heart skipped a beat. He was careless. He actually forgot that she didn't know how to lock the door. He pretended to put the clothes aside as if nothing had happened. He held the door handle and said, "Come here, I will teach you how to lock the door." Fortunately, He hadn't started to take off his clothes. Otherwise, there would definitely be blood splattered on the spot. After teaching He to lock the bathroom door, he retreated with a little fear. He sat on the sofa quietly for a while and felt relieved when he heard the sound of the bathroom running. He picked up an ancient woman, and she was even a heroine. Was it really not a dream? Zhu King pinched his thigh hard and shook his head twice. He quietly picked up the sword on the ground and slowly pulled it out. The sword reflected a cold light. There were some dark brown stains in the blood groove, with a hint of iron smell. What a guy. If there was a chance, let the old man appraise it to see if it was an antique. When He came out, Zhu King was writing something on the table in front of the sofa. She turned her head and saw that her sword was still in the same place. However, the TV on the wall had been taken down. The diamond-shaped dart embedded in the middle of the TV had also been taken down and placed on the corner of the table. "What are you writing?" Zhu King turned her head and saw He wearing his loose shirt and jeans. His hair was wet, and there were drops of water dripping from the ends of his hair. He looked a little modern. "Well, I'm sorting out the problems that need to be solved at the moment." He waved the paper in his hand. "Can you read?" He looked at it carefully and said, "It's a little strange. It's hard to read." "Oh, I'll summarize it later and tell you. This dress is also very strange." She pulled her collar awkwardly. "It's quite nice. It's our custom here to praise people for their looks. You won't think that I'm flirting or something, right? You'd better not say anything frivolous, okay?" Zhu King respected the concept of the ancient people. She couldn't change it in a short time. "There are slippers over there. Throw away your broken, straw sandals. I'll buy a new pair tomorrow." He looked in the direction he was pointing and looked down at her own straw sandals. Her toes moved a few times inside. She didn't say anything and went to put on the slippers. Knock, knock. The door of the room rang. Before Zhu King could react, she had already leaned against the door. "It's food delivery. Don't be nervous." Zhu King comforted her and stood up. There was an inexplicable feeling in his heart. This girl's vigilance and cautiousness were not much different from a homeless stray cat. He took the food from the gap in the door and placed it on the table one by one. He signaled to He. "Eat porridge, steamed buns, and a small plate of pickled vegetables." He stood in front of the table and didn't eat immediately. After a moment of silence, she suddenly said, "I remember something that the second in command often said." "What is it?" Zhu King was curious. Those who are unaccountably solicitous are hiding evil intentions. They looked at each other for a moment. He forced a smile. "But you're a good person." "Of course." Zhu King returned a smile. When He finished eating the porridge and side dishes, it was almost 8 o'clock in the evening. Zhu King stopped writing at the same time. He helped to tidy up the lunch boxes and bags on the table and put them aside. He picked up the dart and weighed it in his hand. "Now, you are in 1,200 years later. Whether you can accept it or not, our next conversation will be based on this foundation. Do you understand? As the saying goes, if you take it from someone, you have to be polite." He touched her stomach. Although she still had doubts about Zhu King's words, she didn't say much. She suppressed her thoughts and nodded, waiting to hear what he had to say. Zhu King saw her attitude, but he didn't care. He played with the iron dart in his hand and pondered. "First of all, it is absolutely safe here, at least in this room. Even if you cut me with a sword, as long as my body doesn't stink, you can hide here for about a week, which is about 7 days. Nothing will happen." He looked at He, seeing that she didn't respond and just listened quietly. He continued, "So you don't have to keep thinking about your sword. You don't know anything here, such as that." Zhu King knocked on the broken TV with the dart. "It's just a tool that can make sounds, used for, well, anyway, it's harmless. It's just a pastime. There are many such things, such as this." He took out his phone, turned on the music player, and casually clicked on a piece of music. A melodious melody came from the speaker. He's arm moved slightly, but she stared at the phone and didn't say anything. "I'm saying this to tell you that it is absolutely safe here. It's normal for me to do anything that you don't understand. Don't misunderstand, I won't do anything to you. I'm just saying." Zhu King pointed at the TV on the table and turned off the music on his phone. He leaned on the sofa and let out a long breath. He looked up at Jong-hee and said, "Do you understand?" He didn't want to cause any more misunderstandings because of Jong-hee's cognitive problems. This was related to his own safety. Jong-hee was silent for a moment and nodded under his gaze. Then there's the outside world. It's a bit complicated, but it's a peaceful world now. Everyone is living and working in peace, and the outside world is also very safe. It's only safe for me, but for you, there's danger everywhere. Why? Because you suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and you might cause harm to others. Zhu King spoke slowly as he pondered, just like the Imperial Palace. If you wander around with a knife, you'll definitely be hunted down. That's probably what it means. It's obvious that you're an outsider. As he spoke, he stood up from the sofa and went to the bedroom to take out his wallet. He found his ID card and placed it in front of the curious Jong-hee. This is a form of identification. Everyone here has it. The serial number is with us at birth. If someone commits a crime or does something bad, we can issue an arrest warrant based on this number. That's why there are a lot of officers on the streets. They have to check from time to time to see if there are any criminals on the run. Those who don't have this will be taken away for further investigation. Then, everything about you will be exposed. I don't know what will happen, but I think it won't be good. Also, the laws here are very strict, and the officers are very powerful. If you hurt someone, you'll definitely be found out, and then you'll go to jail. If you resist arrest, you'll be sentenced to death. Identity was the biggest problem. Zhu King took the things that he had just summarized and explained to Jong-hee what he needed to pay attention to, and what he absolutely couldn't do. An ancient person who appeared out of nowhere, the most important thing now was to hide himself well. Then, other things could be solved slowly. If he was noticed and his identity was exposed, it would definitely cause a sensation in the world. Jong-hee understood quickly. She nodded and said, "I understand. You mean I'm a refugee?" You can say that, but the consequences of being a refugee are very serious. Zhu King frowned and thought for a while. To be precise, it's similar to a slave without a contract. If you're caught, it'll be very tragic. Seeing Jong-hee's expression change, he added, "It's just an example. It's similar to the seriousness of that kind of consequence." Zhu King turned around and looked at Jong-hee, who was sitting there. He pursed his lips and said, "In this world, you're in a very dangerous situation. I'm very happy to know an ancient person from more than 1,200 years ago, and also, this feeling is quite wonderful, so I'm willing to help you. I'll do my best to help you familiarize yourself with this world, hide yourself, and slowly integrate into it. How can I believe you?" Jong-hee lowered her head. She didn't have a strong ability to accept things like Zhu King. Even now, she still couldn't believe that she had come to 1,000 years later. But the clothes on her body, the slippers on her feet, the lights above her head, the magical bathroom, the huge tall buildings, and the strange iron shell that ran outside. Everything she saw was something she had never seen or heard before. Loneliness and fear were like two large hands, tightly strangling her. Right now, she just wanted to go home. She wanted to bring her sword and end this bizarre dream. "If you don't believe me, we can part ways here." Zhu King walked back from the window, placed the iron dart in his hand on the table, and pushed it over. He said, "Helping you is not an easy thing to do. In the current environment, you can shock the entire network with just one jump, and you won't be able to hide. So, you have to cooperate. If you don't believe me, I can't help you either." Jong-hee looked at Zhu King and was silent for a long time, as if she was considering how much of what he said was true and how much was false. Then, what should I do? Zhu King was stuck, scratched his head, and said, "The most important thing right now is to hide your identity well. Everything else can be discussed at length." That will be all for now. I hope you find this story interesting. Leave a like, subscribe, and enable notifications so you won't miss the next part of this story. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.